Okay, hello, this is OK here, and I want to do a special video about opening preparation. And to begin with, suppose a certain teammate is up against NightGryphon, and we look from NightGryphon's games that he tends to push the c-pawn. We could exploit that, and so I want to show you some ideas. d4, d5, London system. And normally I would say wherever this bishop goes, whether here or here, challenge this bishop. So bishop d3 would be a good move. But if we know that bishop b5 is going to provoke c6, then we could take a gamble and see if he does c6. Of course, the strongest move from black here is probably knight b to d7, in which case our plan would be to develop our knight like so. So develop like here, bishop to d6, knight to e5, castles. And we could maybe grab this knight takes, queen takes. And a nice idea in this kind of position is knight at h6. And the point is, if that knight were taken, so it's setting a trap, we'd get knight at f6, winning the queen and opening up the black king. So the strongest move, of course, is king h8. We could grab that bishop, takes back, and knight takes d5. And you see that despite the engine saying that black has got a good position here, we have, at least on this move, it looks like have got quite a lot of pressure on f6, on h6, quite a lot of pieces in hand. So the reason why it's not so great is because bishop takes bishop forces knight takes bishop, and we lose our two attacking pieces on f6 and h6. However, a very interesting way of playing this is with at f6 and continuing the attack, and this is quite hard to play. Of course, the best move for black is just to go bishop at h6, takes, and renew pawn at f6, and probably black could save his bishop, just move the bishop back here. But anyway, this is actually quite good for white. So regardless of what the engine said earlier about this not being good for white, this is actually quite good for white. And the real trap, though, is if black took here, then we can grab here. And if the king ever goes to the g8 square, we have a check picking up the queen. But he can't really avoid it, because if he goes here, we go knight here, check again. If he ever goes to a light square, if he goes to this light square, we have knight takes bishop picking up the queen. If he goes to g8, we have a check picking up the queen. So he has to go to either h6 or h8. H8 doesn't help at all, because then we have pawn at g7 and the same knight check. So h6 is the best try. But then we have bishop at g7. Remember, the knight's protected by the queen. Remember, he's trying to avoid the light squares because he's trying to avoid knight takes bishop. But then we have bishop f6. He has to go back, or he gets mated if he keeps on running forwards. Or if he goes to g6, we've got knight takes bishop takes queen, so he goes back. And now knight takes bishop, and notice how the king is eventually back rank mated on the h-file. We have threats of queen coming in with checkmate. We have threats of bishop at g5 checkmate, bishop at g7 checkmate. This is some good prep, right? This is some good prep. So, how did we get here again? The way we got here was actually if black played the good move, knight to d7. We didn't. What did black do wrong? We just played some very strong. It's a very strong attack. Knight h6 takes at f6. Okay, this is just some very strong moves from white. So it's good to know this opening. So now, going back to the beginning again, if instead black makes the mistake, I would say, of going c6, which I said NightGryphon makes, this weakens up the dark squares, and we can capitalize as follows. We just back off. And for the rest of the game, black is without pawns to fix his weaknesses on the dark squares. We're going to get a bishop soon, a second bishop, and put it on. Pick up a knight. Notice how we don't take this rook, because this bishop is a much better piece. We're eyeing c7. At the beginning we wanted a knight on c7 to pick up the rook, and then rook at g8 pick up the queen. Now it turns out we want a pawn, so what do? Knight takes pawn doesn't work, because then knight takes guards this square. So instead what we do is knight here check, and take this pawn as a free pawn, and now we have two dangerous pawn drops. Bishop could guard one, but then you just capture the other, and this is just crushing. This is just a possible way the game might continue, but notice the dark squares are very weak, and you just pile up pressure. And this is maybe a final position. You just keep on increasing pressure on the pins, and keep on improving your position. Black's got no pieces in hand. There's no point. Don't even need to go sack everything. Just gradually increase pressure, and black's got nothing. This is a chess game. Black's got only 5 pieces left. Okay, so it's game over. Black is in Zugzwang, and the Stockfish is calling mate in 9. So that's some very strong prep as white. London prep. Okay, now suppose we're black and we're against e4. I really recommend this knight f6 move, and just leaving the knight on f6. Allow it to be taken. And the reason for that is because if that knight ever is taken, what we get for the loss of a knight for a pawn is 2 very open bishops, and that pawn is going to be a great pawn to drop on h3 to attack a castled king in future. And on our side we get a very safe king. h6 is still maybe slightly weak, but f6 is very safe, so a much safer king than normal. So it's well worth the sacrifice. Now, if white is smart, as NightGryphon is, he doesn't necessarily take that knight, and so at some point you get fed up and you move the knight, and you develop the bishop and develop the other bishop, and so on. But if your opponent makes such a move, then you can capitalize. Otherwise, this is really quite good for white. You can capitalize by, when you trade off that knight, trade off the bishop, and suddenly you have juicy squares on the light squares. And bishop at e4 would be almost automatic. But there's an even better move, which is bishop at c4. And again, you might be thinking, I want to get a pawn on e2, but actually much stronger is knight. And the reason is this knight is going to control the dark squares, and we already have a kind of mating net here, and I'll show you how. King h1, capture a pawn. Okay, so now we're threatening pawn at e2. Oh, this is very strong. Yeah. So actually, yeah, if we had I should say rather, if we had a pawn, we could look at h3 ideas. Since we don't have a pawn, we just go for the material and go for the back rank attack, and we're picking up a lot of material. So, is there anything else to say here? Bishop takes. Oh, just to say, what else could white do here? Taking the knight is also a bad idea, because then we get what we want as black. We get an advanced pawn pointing towards the opponent's king. So probably the best moves for white here, just to continue developing, like knight c3. And the best response against is, as we said, to do as follows. If queen to e3, oh yes, so queen to e3 is quite interesting. So if white doesn't defend that rook, then we could take it, takes back, rook at h1, blocks, knight at c2, attacking the queen, and then capture the rook. So, yeah, I mean, they're just ideas. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad, but either. Maybe there are better moves than taking the rook. Maybe knight d2 check is also interesting. King h1, knight takes pawn, and we're threatening the rook is hanging. Okay, so these are just some ideas. So this is all about the e2 square. Okay, so next up I want to look at what happens if your opponent takes that knight. Okay, so we get the 2 open bishops. It's a nice sort of position, and again, what do we do? The first thing we do is actually we throw in this check, and what white should do is just block. and then that will help his development. Takes, and this is fair. What the benefit to black is then white doesn't have pawn at h3 at any point in the future. It doesn't have the dangerous bishop. The benefit to white is he's developed very quickly. But if white makes the mistake of pushing c3, so continuing the theme of opening up this c2 pawn, we just retreat and say, well, although we've wasted 2 moves, we've created a slight opening. We've induced a weakness on c2. Bishop d3. It's fine. What else could white do? Knight f3, bishop f. If knight f3, bishop f5, and we start hitting this weakness, and we can pick up a lot of material very quickly. Even if knight here, just defend. Takes, and back off. And yeah, so this is all very good for black. And at some point we can begin attacking. Even here, bishop takes queen is not on the cards, I should say, because of knight at h3 with the smothered mate threat. The smothered mate threat is if you go here, rook takes, knight takes pawn is checkmate. But if you take it, then there's a very nice move. It's a rook at h1, king takes h1, at g2, king here, and a second rook at h1, checkmate. Okay, we have 2 rooks, that's the key to that mate. So that's why the queen wasn't hanging in that variation. But anyway, I'm going too quickly. So if instead bishop d3 is very logical to guard the weakness. Okay, so we just develop castles and not get too scared about g7. And if white sacks, okay, block off that diagonal and then take that knight, and then plan is to chase away the queen. But actually, even better than chase away the queen is to back off first, and bishop h6 would be logical. But again, we're under attack, so we try to restrict trades. At g7, okay, knight at f5, and takes, bishop here, queen here, okay, takes pawn here, attacking our bishop, we back off, knight g5, so basically, this is sort of position where we do need to defend, and once we finish defending, we'll be winning. And this is the final trick. It would be very tempting to defend like this, and that would be a final trap we fall into because of this, and suddenly white is winning again. So defending isn't so easy. You have to be careful about this. But a simple move like queen e7, and suddenly there are no more. Yeah, white could try this, but so there's one final trap. We have to defend against queen takes bishop. How to defend? Simply knight at f5 or knight at g4. Knight at g4. So if takes, then actually don't take back, but go at g6. That's the way to do it. Yeah, that's a very nice little trap. Oh, the queen's not quite trapped because of this. So this gets quite complicated. Why can't we go knight at f5? Knight at f5 takes bishop, and then go here. And this has to be good. If the queen backs off to here, then what do we do? Knight f takes d4. Why can't he just take with the knight? Oh, I see. The danger is when we take with the knight, that's actually hitting the queen and hitting the bishop. So you'd have to run back with the queen. Okay, knight takes c2, queen takes c2. The problem is bishop is landing here. This sole pawn is actually not much of a danger, and as long as white doesn't have a heavy. So sorry, the move here is of course this straight away, and this is now crushing. Yeah, because we're threatening knight takes bishop next, and so on. The queen is trapped even. Yes, that was the move. So that's why in this position white would probably have to just sack here. Okay, so defending with one last time with the knight, probably with knight at f5 I like even nicer. And yeah, so let's just quickly run through that line again. We back off and we allow the opponent to sack, but we just back off again and just keep him from getting any pieces. Takes here, back off, just to sort of dance, not letting him get any pieces and staying solid. This is a sort of a lesson in how to defend. And after here, oh, not that one. Knight F takes d4, and it's game over. It really is. That's it. And I'll delete that. Okay, so that's a lesson in how to defend, and exploiting the weakness on c2. So the next thing I wanted to quickly have a look at is, okay, it's another example of how to defend, this time against the f7 sac. Now you have to be careful. Suppose white is just very keen to sack on you straight away. Queen f3 check, back off, and here. And it looks like white's getting the piece back. And he will be. One thing you could do is try and harass that queen. And what if the queen just decides, okay, we're just going to go to g3. Actually, you don't actually have to protect this knight. You just develop your bishop, and if he takes the knight, takes back, the king is actually quite safe. And the reason why you'd want to do that is because this pawn g4 is quite a good disincentive from white to ever castle. If he ever castles, there's already a dangerous pawn attacking his king side. But in this particular position, if he wants to try and keep the pin or make something of this position, white might just try and sack, get 2 pieces for the queen, and we get this sort of position here. But notice how this bishop looking at the king side and this bishop looking at the queen side actually mean it's very hard for white to castle. Which side can he castle, even just hanging a pawn like this? And so this is just an example of a game. You get a lot of pressure, and probably this is a critical point. If you just kept on going pawn takes knight, then white might have some counterplay here. With rook here check, in fact he would have a mating attack. King here, and with 2 pawns we are actually mating this king. But equally, if this king steps up, then with the knight here, check, king here, knight here, it's getting checkmated. But this is the kind of thing where, so sometimes you have to defend. So instead of just taking the knight, just take one move out to defend, and then you're fine. And now black is in control. So maybe sometimes you don't need to be afraid of having an open, of being sacked on early in the opening, so long as you manage to take care to defend entry points such as this one. Of course, the thing to be really careful of is that in this position here, like, so for example, if was this, then this, then this, and we just ignore the threat and just developed, even this would still be just about okay because the knights are guarding the knight checks. But the thing to be very careful of is when if the knight can come here with check and drop a pawn here, because that stops the king running back and he has to run forward, and then white would try and pick up a bishop for f7, and then for h6 just remove the knight and open up this bishop. That's the pattern you have to be careful of in these sorts of scenarios. Okay, so next and finally I want to talk about a very nice Queen-Sac line if your opponent plays d6 and not d5. So against d6, so the weakness of d6 is it makes the light squares a little bit weaker. And one way of taking advantage of that is, so this is a very natural move, bishop here, and the threat is bishop takes knight, queen takes, and black is winning a free pawn. So a very nice move for white in this position is d5. And probably the best move for black is just to take this knight and then go knight e5. And the strategy for white should be to throw in a check here and develop this bishop to this diagonal. And again, it's these light squares, and white should have a very nice game attacking the light squares. So takes a knight, and this is a very important move, knight here, because the point is if you take this knight, then pawn takes, always taking with the pawn, advancing a pawn to the position, threatening pawn at f7. And this is a very uncomfortable position. If the knight was to simply move, then pawn f7 is going to pick up another knight, well, for some pawns. Maybe even better than pawn f7 is you attack the defender so that it will be mate. But the thing about this position is black can't really develop very easily. If he does something like g6 to try and develop the bishop, takes, takes, and pawn f7 is checkmate. So yeah, black is out of time. So what this position is, it's all about a light square bind. So you have a bishop on one diagonal, the other bishop on the other diagonal, and you conduct a light square bind on the position. And knight e6 finishes the light square bind. You can never take it, or we take back. The game might continue as follows. Knight b5, putting pressure. So something to be aware of, knight b5 would put pressure on c7, but you can defend it with a check. But you can even castle, and you just keep this light square bind, and you should be doing very well indeed. What else could happen in this position? Well, a very natural move is not to take this knight at all, but to go knight e5. And in that position, I want to show you a very nice queen-sac line. You take the knight, you lose your queen, and you sack on f7. And if the queen just sidesteps, then we could just grab a rook, and we're threatening pawn at f7 and all sorts of nasty things. Probably just grabbing the rook is a good idea. But the most natural move is probably king takes knight. The other move actually to be aware of is queen d7. Yeah, so queen d7, we just grab the bishop, and the king can never take the knight because of pawn here, forking the king and the queen. So queen d7 is actually a problem. Why not just queen b8 or queen c8? Well, queen c8 we could still grab the bishop. So queen b8 would be interesting. But queen b8 we just grab the rook, and if black tries to get his piece out, then suggesting bishop b5 checks. It wants to even give up the queen. So this is already very, 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 very bad. Takes, takes, bishop takes, pawn at d7, then we put our pawn on f7, king to d8, we grab a rook. Why can't he just take it? Because then rook at e8, why can't we just take it? Because we have another pawn, we have another rook landing soon enough on the back rank. Rook at e8, king to c7, we want a knight here to control everything. Knight here is good, can't even be sacked on because there's another knight taking it. If, say, king to b7, we could add another knight on a5. Two knights, three away like this, control a lot of squares. King to a6, but this knight itself is not controlled. But no worries, pawn at b5, you can take the knight, but I've got b4 checkmate. But going all the way back, so probably, realistically, against, just going right back to the beginning, we just develop normally, and then d5. Take the knight, sack our queen, takes f7. Realistically, most players will take that knight, and how do we continue? So here's how to continue. Knight at g5, throw in a check, and if they block with the knight, it's just mate. So I'm going to assume that someone blocks with the pawn. That seems more sensible. Simply take it, and again we're threatening checkmate. So takes back, take it again. There's no way to stop checkmate except blocking with the queen. So this is the problem with the initial position. You win a queen, and it's all over. What else could black do? So this check is incredible. That's the incredible check. Queen d7 immediately, just take the queen. And here's a very important move, at c6, because you're opening up, so the king can never try and hide away on b8. You're opening up this square. Throw in a check, throw in another check. You can king e8, go at d7. If king f7, knight g5, it would continue. If knight takes d7, check, queen, queen takes knight, queen takes pawn, and this is blocking off the king's escape and then mating it. Okay, so very dangerous mating attacks. If the king just runs, Then knight g5, king runs up, queen here, and then there's a very pretty mate which I was just alluding to in the previous study I was talking about here, and it's using these two diagonals, and I would usually say knight to e6. So knight to e6 controls these two squares. You could block on them, but you just go takes, 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 takes. So even if black blocks here, you can just go takes, and it's checkmate. So going all the way back to the beginning again, the key idea here is d5, sack it, and we'll promote that variation and drop a new knight here. And probably, so obviously king g8 just mate in one, probably the most challenging line would be king g6, but then the move here is you simply, actually you take with the king even more calmly, instead of taking with the knight. King takes, and now you're threatening the same pattern with bishop at f, bishop here check, and these two bishops are going to combine to mate this king. If, for example, black did something like this, check, looking at this pawn, actually just move back. There are no more checks. So what else could black do? If he wants to actually defend f7, he might do a move like this, which seems to defend f7. But it doesn't defend f5. So f5, and bring in the other bishop. And he only has a queen in hand, and if he gives away the queen, then that's not going to be good. So if he just keeps on going forward, that's checkmate. So he has to block with something. Maybe blocks like this, but then bishop takes knight, knight takes, check with the knight, king h4, knight f3 mate. Okay, so that's some really beautiful prep. I hope you enjoyed. Just to recap what we discussed, we discussed how to play the London system, both this line after knight d7. What you do is you just bring the knight in and trade everything, and then go knight h6, and you win then this pawn, and you're eyeing f6 and h6, and instead of taking that to the bishop, which would be automatic, you actually go straight for f6, and that's a very strong move, because if he tries to take your knight, he's getting into all kinds of trouble. The main line being, of course, this, and knight takes bishop. And so it's not check here, just knight takes bishop, and there are just too many mates threatened. So that was the first line. The second line we looked at was when he pushes the c6 pawn, and that just opens up the dark squares. You just retreat calmly and pick up lots of material. And the third line we saw was again when if a player opens up that c2 pawn, just calmly retreat. So you induce the weakness and then you retreat. And if he plays the right move, that's okay too. We get rid of that bishop, and we get a nice game as well. But we just calmly retreat, and this is a kind of game where we'd have to allow ourselves to be attacked, and we have to defend well. And it's important to defend in these sorts of positions, not to attack. Just defend for a few moves, and eventually things will be very beautiful. And the second example where we had to defend was this game with darubaru. So against this sort of thing, if you really don't want the bishop takes f7 sack, you'd play e6 and d5, and this is a perfectly sensible way of playing it. And you could even sacrifice this knight. This would also be a very nice way of playing it, and black is very comfortable. But and I think this is good, actually, maybe even more recommended. But if you just go for the kill, this is actually also probably quite good for black, allowing white to sack on you and just saying you have material edge. And whichever way white castles, wherever he puts his king, there's a world of danger. You're going to be bringing a rook to the e-file, and both sides you're going to be waiting for a pawn at a3 or pawn at h3. And yeah, okay, and so that was just a reminder of that again. And finally, we looked at this beautiful Queen-Sac line, where if black plays d6, you go for f7. Takes, takes, takes. And this is incredibly strong, because if you take back, knight here check, and the key is the light square bind. the light square bind. Bishop's here. Sometimes bishop's along this diagonal as well. So the light square bind, and he has to give up his queen. And as I said, probably the best try is this, but then just simply king takes bishop, very calmly. So the light square bind is a real nightmare. And if black is smart and stops it with bishop takes knight, the light square bind doesn't go away, but it comes in a different form. Pawn takes to open up the bishop. Bishop here, check, bishop here, the light square bind continues. E6 would just get taken. So knight here to defend. What do we do? Takes, takes, and the key move, knight e6. So with that, I hope you enjoy this little bit of preparation for your Crazyhouse games. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.